The Boeing 777 was diving toward the ground with 300 passengers screaming and the captain unconscious when the cargo pilot in seat 12C stood up and walked to the cockpit. Minutes later, when she radioed her old military call sign to the F-22 fighters, two of America's most elite pilots nearly fell out of the sky in shock, because legends aren't supposed to fly commercial. Before you watch full story, comment your country below. Hit subscribe because tomorrow I'm bringing the best story yet. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the tarmac at Miami International Airport on Thursday, March 15, 2018, as passengers filed through Gate D-17 for United Airlines Flight 847 bound for Seattle. Among the travelers boarding the Boeing 777 was a woman in her late 30s wearing a simple navy blue pilot's jacket over jeans and a white t-shirt, carrying a worn leather flight bag that had seen countless journeys. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hazel eyes held the calm, observant quality of someone who spent their life in cockpits. She moved through the boarding process with the efficient, no-nonsense manner of an aviation professional between assignments, drawing no particular attention from the gate agents or fellow passengers who assumed she was just another cargo pilot heading home after flying freight routes through the night. Captain Rebecca Falcon Chin settled into seat 12C, a standard economy window seat that gave her a view of the wing and engines. She had specifically chosen this seat out of habit, always preferring to see the aircraft's systems during flight. The middle seat beside her remained empty, but the aisle seat was occupied by a cheerful businessman in his 50s who immediately struck up conversation as he organized his laptop bag and settled in for the 5-hour flight across the country. "Another pilot, huh?" the man said, gesturing to her jacket with its subtle wing insignia. "You fly commercial or cargo?" "Cargo mostly," Rebecca replied with a polite smile, keeping her answer brief. "Freight routes up and down the East Coast. Nothing too exciting." "Still, pretty cool job," the businessman continued. "I'm in medical equipment sales, so I'm always flying. Must be nice to be the one in control up front instead of stuck back here with the rest of us." Rebecca nodded pleasantly but didn't elaborate. She had learned long ago that keeping conversations simple was the easiest way to avoid questions she couldn't answer. The truth was far more complicated than anyone in this cabin could imagine. Before she became a cargo pilot flying DC-10 freighters loaded with packages and parcels through routine overnight routes, she had spent 15 years as one of the most decorated fighter pilots in United States Air Force history. Her call sign Falcon wasn't just a nickname but a legend whispered with reverence in fighter squadrons around the world. She had flown F-15 Eagles and F-22 Raptors in combat zones across 3 continents, accumulating aerial victories that remained classified, leading strike missions into the most dangerous airspace on Earth, and earning medals that sat in a locked box at her modest apartment because she never spoke about them. She had commanded elite fighter squadrons, trained the next generation of combat pilots, and executed missions that would never appear in any public record. Her tactical genius and unmatched flying skills had saved countless lives and turned impossible situations into victories that military historians would study for decades, though her name would never appear in those studies. But that life was behind her now. After her last classified mission 3 years ago, something inside her had shifted. The constant danger, the weight of command decisions, the faces of the pilots she had lost over the years, it all became too heavy. She had resigned her commission quietly, walking away from a career that was destined for flag rank, and taken a job flying cargo planes where the only thing at stake was delivering packages on time. Her military records were sealed, her achievements classified, and her legendary call sign known only to those who had served in the shadowy world of fighter aviation. To everyone else, she was just Rebecca Chin, an ordinary cargo pilot with an ordinary life. The flight attendants moved through the cabin conducting their pre-flight checks, demonstrating safety procedures that Rebecca could have recited in her sleep. She recognized the professional competence in their movements, the way they scanned the cabin constantly, reading passengers and situations with practiced eyes. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a welcoming smile, paused at Rebecca's row. "Can I get you anything before we take off, ma'am?" she asked. "Just water, please," Rebecca replied. "Thank you." "You're a pilot?" the flight attendant asked, noticing the jacket. "Cargo," Rebecca confirmed. "Just heading home after a couple of runs." "Well, you picked a good day to be a passenger," the flight attendant said cheerfully. "Captain Morrison is one of our best. 25 years with United, smooth as silk every time. You just sit back and relax." Rebecca smiled and nodded, watching as the flight attendant continued down the aisle. She had no doubt Captain Morrison was an excellent pilot. Commercial aviation attracted skilled professionals who executed their duties with precision and care. But she also knew that commercial flying and combat aviation existed in completely different universes. The skills required to safely transport passengers from point A to point B had almost nothing in common with the split-second tactical decisions, extreme aircraft handling, and strategic thinking required in aerial combat. It wasn't better or worse, just different worlds entirely. The engines spooled up with their characteristic whine as Flight 847 pushed back from the gate at exactly 9:30 in the morning. Rebecca watched the ground crew through her window with professional interest, noting their efficient movements and clear hand signals. The Boeing 777 taxied toward runway 09, joining the orderly queue of aircraft departing Miami's busy airspace. The captain's voice came through the intercom, smooth and confident. "Good morning, folks, this is Captain Morrison from the flight deck. We're number 3 for takeoff, and we're looking at smooth air most of the way to Seattle. Flight time today will be about 5 hours and 15 minutes. We'll be cruising at 39,000 feet, and the weather in Seattle is partly cloudy with temperatures in the low 50s. Sit back, relax, and we'll have you there before you know it." The businessman beside Rebecca had already pulled out his laptop and was typing away at a spreadsheet, occasionally muttering to himself about quarterly projections. Across the aisle, a young couple held hands nervously, probably first-time flyers based on how they startled at every sound. Behind her, Rebecca could hear a family with small children getting settled, the parents working to keep everyone entertained with tablets and snacks. It was all so beautifully ordinary, so peacefully routine. This was what civilian life looked like, and Rebecca had chosen it deliberately. Flight 847 lifted off smoothly, climbing into the bright Florida sky as Miami's coastline fell away below. Rebecca felt the familiar sensations of flight, the acceleration pushing her back into her seat, the slight bank as the aircraft turned onto its northwesterly heading, the subtle vibrations that told her the engines were performing perfectly. Her trained mind automatically processed every sound and movement, a habit she could never quite shake even when she was just a passenger. The first hour of flight passed uneventfully. The seatbelt sign chimed off once they reached cruising altitude, and flight attendants began their beverage service. Rebecca accepted a coffee and returned to the aviation magazine she had brought, reading about new developments in cargo aircraft technology. The businessman beside her had dozed off, his laptop balanced precariously on his tray table. The cabin had settled into that peaceful lull that characterizes smooth cruising flight, with passengers reading, sleeping, or staring out windows at the clouds below. They were somewhere over northern Alabama, approaching the Tennessee border, when Rebecca noticed something wrong. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in the engine tone that probably no one else in the cabin detected. Her head came up from her magazine, and her eyes went to the window, scanning the wing and engine nacelle with practiced intensity. Everything looked normal visually, but something felt off. Then she felt it, a barely perceptible shudder through the airframe, there and gone in an instant. The businessman beside her didn't stir. No one else in the cabin seemed to have noticed anything. Rebecca's hand moved to her armrest, fingers pressing against the plastic as she focused all her senses on the aircraft around her. There it was again, another subtle vibration, slightly stronger this time. Her pulse remained steady, her breathing calm, but her mind was now fully engaged, analyzing and assessing with the instincts developed through thousands of hours in high-performance aircraft. The intercom crackled to life, and Captain Morrison's voice came through, still calm but with a subtle tension underneath that Rebecca recognized immediately. "Folks, this is the captain. We're experiencing a minor technical issue with one of our systems up here. Nothing to be concerned about, but as a precaution we're going to be descending to a lower altitude. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin." The reaction in the cabin was mixed. Some passengers barely looked up from their phones and tablets. Others exchanged worried glances, their faces showing concern. The young couple across the aisle gripped hands tighter. Rebecca's businessman neighbor woke up, looking confused. "What's happening?" he asked. "Are we okay?" "Just a precaution," Rebecca said calmly. "Pilots are being careful. That's their job." But Rebecca's mind was racing through possibilities. A minor technical issue that required immediate descent to a lower altitude suggested something more serious than the captain was letting on. Pressurization problem? Engine trouble? Flight control issue? She felt the aircraft begin its descent, the nose dipping slightly as the pilots reduced power and started down. The descent rate felt normal, controlled, nothing emergency about it yet. Then everything changed in an instant. The aircraft suddenly pitched forward sharply, far more aggressively than any normal maneuver. Passengers gasped and screamed as loose items flew forward. The businessman's laptop crashed to the floor. Rebecca's hands shot out, bracing against the seat in front of her, her body automatically adjusting to the violent movement. The aircraft rolled left, not dramatically but enough that people slid in their seats, children started crying, and panic began spreading through the cabin like wildfire. "What's happening? Oh God, what's happening?" a woman shouted from several rows back. The flight attendants were struggling to maintain their composure, one of them speaking urgently into the intercom phone while gripping a seat back with white knuckles. The lead flight attendant's voice came over the PA, strained but trying to maintain calm. "Everyone please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We're experiencing some turbulence." But Rebecca knew this wasn't turbulence. This was a control problem and a serious one. The aircraft's movements were erratic, inconsistent with any weather phenomenon. The pilots were fighting something and they were losing. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, moving toward the front of the cabin with the sure-footed balance of someone who had operated in far more chaotic environments. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," a flight attendant called out, but Rebecca kept moving, reaching the forward galley area where the lead flight attendant was hanging up the intercom phone, her face pale. "I'm a pilot," Rebecca said quickly, her voice cutting through the cabin noise with absolute authority. "What's the situation?" The flight attendant stared at her, momentarily frozen, then made a decision. Captain Morrison collapsed. "First Officer Davis is alone up there. He says the controls aren't responding properly. Something's wrong with the flight systems." Rebecca's mind instantly shifted into combat mode, that mental state where fear disappears and everything becomes crystal clear. "Open the cockpit door. Now." "I can't just." "Open it," Rebecca repeated, and something in her voice, some quality of absolute command that had once led fighter squadrons into battle, made the flight attendant immediately comply. She pulled out her key and unlocked the reinforced cockpit door. Rebecca pushed through and took in the situation in a single glance. Captain Morrison was slumped in the left seat, unconscious, still strapped in but clearly incapacitated. First Officer Davis, a young man probably in his early 30s, was in the right seat gripping the controls with both hands, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide with panic. The instrument panels were lit up like a Christmas tree, warning lights and alerts cascading across multiple screens. The aircraft was in a shallow dive, the nose pitched down about 15 degrees, and the controls were clearly not responding normally. "I'm a pilot," Rebecca said, moving to stand between the two seats. "Talk to me. What happened?" First Officer Davis glanced at her desperately. Captain just collapsed, clutching his chest. "Heart attack, I think." Then the flight controls started acting crazy. "I've got reduced authority on the yoke. Autopilot kicked off. I'm fighting it but it wants to pitch down. I can't get the nose up properly." Rebecca's eyes were already scanning the instruments, her brain processing information at incredible speed. Airspeed building. Altitude decreasing. Engine parameters normal. Flight control indicators showing anomalies. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating on System A. This was a cascading failure, multiple systems going wrong simultaneously. "What's your altitude?" she asked. 28,000 feet and descending. "I can't stop it." Airspeed. 320 knots and climbing. "Too fast. Way too fast." They were in an accelerating dive with degraded controls and an incapacitated captain. Rebecca made her decision in a fraction of a second. "I'm taking over. Move." "You're not type rated on a 777. Davis protested. "I'm rated on aircraft that make this look like a toy," Rebecca snapped. "Move to the observer seat or stay there and help, but I'm flying this airplane now." Something in her voice, the absolute confidence and authority, made Davis nod. Rebecca squeezed past him and dropped into the captain's seat, her hands immediately going to the controls. She could feel it instantly, the mushiness in the yoke, the delayed response, the way the aircraft wanted to pitch nose down despite her inputs. This wasn't pilot error or simple system failure. This was major hydraulic degradation combined with possible flight computer malfunctions. "Get on the radio," Rebecca ordered Davis. "Declare an emergency. Tell them we have an incapacitated captain, flight control malfunctions, and we're descending through 26,000 feet. We need priority vectors to the nearest suitable airport." Davis grabbed the radio mic, his voice shaking but functional. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Atlanta Center, United 847 declaring an emergency. We have incapacitated captain, flight control problems, descending out of 26,000 feet, requesting immediate assistance." The response was immediate. United 847 Atlanta Center, roger your Mayday. Squawk 7700. Say souls on board and fuel remaining. 287 souls, fuel is 42,000 pounds, Davis responded. Rebecca was already working the problem with both hands and feet. She reduced power on both engines, trying to slow their descent rate by decreasing thrust rather than fighting it with pitch control alone. She deployed the speed brakes partially, feeling how the aircraft responded. Not good. The controls were degraded badly, but she could work with this. She had flown damaged aircraft before, had brought fighters home with battle damage that should have made them unflyable. This was manageable if she stayed calm and thought tactically. Atlanta Center, United 847, we have reduced flight control authority. Believe we have hydraulic system failures and possible flight computer malfunctions. We need vectors to nearest suitable airport with long runways and emergency equipment standing by. United 847, nearest suitable is Nashville International, bearing 045, 60 miles. Turn right heading 045, descend and maintain 10,000. Rebecca began the turn carefully, feeling how the aircraft wanted to overbank, how the controls were mushy and unpredictable. She used small inputs, working with the degraded systems rather than fighting them. Beside her, Davis was pulling up emergency checklists, his hands shaking but his training kicking in. Hydraulic System A showing 0 pressure, he reported. System B fluctuating. System C holding but showing anomalies. Captain's condition? Rebecca asked, keeping her voice calm and professional even as she worked the increasingly difficult controls. Davis leaned over and checked Morrison's pulse. He's breathing, pulse is weak but steady. Definitely cardiac episode. Rebecca keyed the intercom to the cabin. This is the cockpit. We have the situation under control, but we're diverting to Nashville for an emergency landing. Everyone remains seated with seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for emergency landing procedures. In the cabin, panic was spreading. Passengers were crying, praying, calling loved ones. But Rebecca couldn't think about that now. She had one job, get this damaged aircraft on the ground safely. She had done harder things. She had landed an F-22 with one engine out and half her control surfaces shot away after a mission over hostile territory. She had talked a wingman through a hydraulic failure at night over the ocean. She had made tactical decisions in split seconds that saved lives and completed missions. This was just another emergency, just another problem to solve. United 847 Atlanta Center, be advised we're scrambling F-22s from Dobbins Air Reserve Base to provide assistance. They'll be on your wing in 8 minutes. Rebecca's hands tightened on the yoke. F-22s. Her old aircraft. The fighter she had mastered more completely than perhaps any pilot in the Air Force. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember the feeling of that incredible machine responding to her slightest touch, the raw power, the beautiful precision. Then she pushed the memory away and focused on the present. Roger, Atlanta Center. Tell them we appreciate the assist. The Boeing 777 was down to 18,000 feet now, still descending but at a more controlled rate. Rebecca had managed to slow their airspeed to a safer 290 knots, though it was taking constant effort. Every control input was a negotiation with the damaged systems. She could feel sweat on her forehead, but her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. This was what she had trained for her entire life, staying calm when everything was falling apart. United 847, this is Venom 1, 2 F-22s intercepting from your 6 o'clock, 12 miles. Rebecca keyed the radio. Venom 1 United 847 roger. We've got significant flight control degradation. Be advised we're in a controlled descent but aircraft is handling poorly. United 847 Venom 1, will be visual in 2 minutes. What's your plan? Attempting emergency landing Nashville. We'll need long final approach, shallow descent angle. Not confident in ability to execute go-around if we miss. There was a pause, then a different voice came on the radio, the flight lead of the F-22 formation. United 847 Venom 1, understand. We'll bracket you on the approach, give you visual references. You've got this. Rebecca was lining up for their descent into Nashville, working the damaged controls constantly, when the F-22s appeared. 2 sleek gray Raptors slid into formation on either side of the lumbering 777, their pilots visible in their cockpits, giving her thumbs up. She felt a surge of emotion seeing those aircraft, her aircraft, the machine she had loved more than any other. For a moment she was back in that cockpit, back in the life she had left behind. United 847 Venom 1, you're doing great. Maintain current descent rate. Nashville is 40 miles, you're lined up perfect. Venom 1, United 847 Roger, Rebecca replied, then added, good to see you boys. Brings back memories. There was a pause. United 847, you a military pilot? Was. Long time ago. What did you fly? Rebecca hesitated, then decided it didn't matter anymore. F-22s. Among other things. The radio went silent for several seconds. Then Venom 1 came back, his voice different now, careful. United 847, just for verification, what was your call sign? Rebecca felt her jaw tighten. She hadn't used that name in 3 years. Hadn't wanted to hear it again. But maybe these pilots needed to know they weren't just escorting a cargo pilot flying a crippled airliner. Maybe they needed to know that the person fighting this damaged aircraft had fought worse battles and won. Venom 1, call sign was Falcon. The radio exploded with activity. Say again, United 847. Did you say Falcon? Affirmative. Falcon as in Captain Rebecca Chin? The Falcon. That's affirm. There was another pause, longer this time, and Rebecca could imagine the conversation happening in those F-22 cockpits. Every fighter pilot in the Air Force knew the name Falcon. Her legendary status was taught in tactical schools. Her missions were studied in classified briefings. She had become mythology, a ghost story told to inspire young pilots. And now here she was, flying a crippled passenger jet with degraded controls and an unconscious captain. Venom 1's voice came back, and it was filled with something Rebecca hadn't heard in years. Reverence. Ma'am, this is Major Richardson. Captain Falcon, it's an honor. We've got your 6. Whatever you need. In the other F-22, Venom 2 chimed in. Ma'am, I wrote my thesis at the Academy on your Kosovo missions. You're a legend. We're with you all the way. Rebecca felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Venom Flight, I appreciate that. Right now I need you to keep me honest on altitude and heading. My instruments are questionable, and I'm hand-flying on degraded hydraulics. Roger that, ma'am. You're currently 15,000 feet, descending 500 feet per minute. Heading 045 is good. Nashville International is 30 miles, 12 o'clock. Rebecca worked the controls, feeling the aircraft fight her. The hydraulic situation was getting worse, not better. System B had now dropped to critically low pressure. She was basically flying on 1.5 hydraulic systems, and the flight computers were struggling to compensate. A lesser pilot would have lost this aircraft already. Even an experienced commercial pilot might not have the tactical flying skills to handle these conditions. But Rebecca had trained for impossible situations her entire career. United 847 Nashville Tower, we have you inbound for emergency landing runway 02R. Winds 030 at 12 knots. Emergency equipment is standing by. You're cleared for straight-in approach, no restrictions. Nashville Tower, United 847 Roger. Be advised we have extremely limited control authority. Request emergency vehicles position themselves along the full length of the runway. There's a possibility we may depart the runway surface after landing. United 847, understood. Emergency crews are positioning now. Additional equipment rolling from all stations. Rebecca was down to 10,000 feet, 30 miles out. She needed to start configuring the aircraft for landing, but every change to the configuration would affect how the damaged controls handled. She needed to do this carefully, methodically. Davis, she said to the first officer, when I call for flaps, I want them extended slowly, 1 notch at a time. Wait for my command between each extension. Understood, Davis replied. He had calmed significantly, seeing how Rebecca was handling the situation. How do you want to handle the landing gear? Late and all at once. I don't want the drag until we're committed to the runway. That's not standard procedure, Davis said hesitantly. Standard procedures assume normal flight controls, Rebecca replied calmly. We don't have normal anything. Trust me on this. On the radio, Venom 1 was providing constant updates. Falcon, you're looking good. 7,000 feet, 20 miles out. Descent rate is perfect. You're right on the approach path. Rebecca could see Nashville now, the city sprawling below them. The airport was ahead, runway lights visible even in the daylight. She was approaching from the northeast, the approach path taking them over suburban areas before reaching the runway threshold. This was going to be tight. She had one shot at this. The aircraft was too damaged to execute a go-around. If she missed this approach, they would likely crash. Venom 1 Falcon, I'm going to need you to talk me down. Call altitudes and airspeeds continuously on final. Roger that, ma'am. We've got you. Rebecca took a deep breath and began the final descent. Davis, flaps 1. She felt the aircraft shudder as the flaps began to extend, the aerodynamics changing, the controls responding differently. She compensated instantly, adding a touch of power, adjusting her pitch angle. The F-22 stayed with her, rock solid on either wing. Flaps 5, she ordered. Another shudder. The aircraft wanted to pitch up. She fought it gently, working with the degraded systems. 5,000 feet altitude, 10 miles from the runway threshold. Flaps 10. The aircraft was becoming increasingly difficult to control as they slowed and configured for landing. Rebecca was using constant control inputs, tiny adjustments, feeling her way through the malfunctions like a surgeon working on a critical patient. Sweat was running down her face now, but her focus was absolute. Falcon, you're 4,000 feet, 8 miles out. Airspeed 200 knots. On glide path, Venom 1 called. Flaps 15. They were committed now. The aircraft was in landing configuration except for the gear. Rebecca could see the runway clearly ahead, the emergency vehicles lined up along its length, their lights flashing. 3 miles to go. Falcon, 3,000 feet, 4 miles. Airspeed 180. Looking good. Rebecca keyed the cabin intercom one more time. This is the cockpit. Brace for impact. Brace, brace, brace. 2 miles out, she ordered, gear down. The landing gear extended with a solid thunk that she felt through the airframe. The aircraft dropped slightly with the added drag, and the already difficult controls became even mushier. Rebecca added power, adjusted pitch, fought the aircraft's tendency to roll left. The F-22s were still there, one on each wing, their pilots watching every movement. Falcon, you're 2,000 feet, 2 miles. Airspeed 165. Glide path is perfect. You've got this, ma'am. 1 mile out. The runway was filling her windscreen. Rebecca could see the threshold markings, the touchdown zone, the emergency vehicles waiting. Her hands were steady on the controls, her mind processing hundreds of inputs per second, making micro-adjustments based on feedback from the degraded systems. 500 feet, Venom 1 called. Airspeed 155. Looking beautiful, Falcon. The runway rushed up to meet them. Rebecca eased back on the power, raised the nose slightly, felt for the ground. The main landing gear touched with a firm bump, then the nose gear came down. She was on the runway, but the emergency wasn't over. She deployed full speed brakes and reverse thrust, but the aircraft was pulling hard to the left. She fought it with asymmetric thrust and rudder, using every bit of control authority she had left. The Boeing 777 rolled down runway 02R, slowing gradually but drifting left despite Rebecca's best efforts. They crossed the center line, approached the edge of the pavement, and Rebecca thought for a moment they might roll into the grass. But at the last second, the aircraft responded to her inputs and straightened out. Speed dropped through 60 knots, 50, 40. They were slowing now, really slowing. At 30 knots, Rebecca finally let herself believe they were going to make it. At 20 knots, she brought the aircraft to a complete stop, right in the middle of the runway, emergency vehicles already swarming around them. Rebecca's hands were shaking now as adrenaline finally caught up with her. She shut down the engines, set the parking brake, and turned to First Officer Davis, who was staring at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "That was incredible," he whispered. "How did you do that?" Rebecca didn't answer. She just sat there for a moment, breathing, coming down from the intense focus of the emergency. Then she unbuckled and moved to check on Captain Morrison, who was stirring slightly, conscious but clearly in medical distress. "Get the paramedics in here immediately," she ordered. The cockpit door opened and the lead flight attendant appeared, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us. You saved everyone. Who are you?" But Rebecca didn't answer that either. She was already thinking about what came next. The investigation, the media attention, her identity revealed. Her quiet life as a cargo pilot was over. The moment she had used that call sign on the radio, the moment the F-22 pilots had recognized her, everything had changed. Through the cockpit windows, she could see the emergency vehicles positioning around the aircraft. The F-22s had broken off and were circling overhead, their pilots no doubt already on the radio spreading the word that Captain Falcon had just saved 300 lives flying a crippled passenger jet with skills that defied belief. The evacuation was orderly and calm, nothing like the panic that could have occurred. Passengers filed off the aircraft, many of them crying, many of them praising God and holding loved ones. The cargo pilot who had been sitting quietly in seat 12C had become their guardian angel, though most of them still didn't understand exactly what had happened up front. As Rebecca finally walked down the aircraft stairs onto the Nashville tarmac, she was immediately surrounded by emergency personnel, airport officials and airline representatives. Captain Morrison was being loaded into an ambulance, but he was conscious and would survive. First Officer Davis was giving a statement to investigators, his voice still shaky as he described what had happened. Then Rebecca saw them approaching. Two figures in flight suits, their helmets tucked under their arms, their faces young but their eyes holding the sharp intelligence of fighter pilots. Major Richardson and his wingman from Venom Flight. They walked up to her and stopped, coming to attention. "Captain Chin," Richardson said formally. "It was an honor to fly with you today, ma'am." Rebecca nodded, too exhausted for words. But Richardson wasn't done. "Ma'am, you should know that what you did up there, bringing that aircraft down with those control problems, that was beyond anything we learned in any school. That was pure fighter pilot instinct and skill. You saved 300 lives today with abilities that only someone with your background could possess." The younger pilot, Venom 2, added, "I've studied your missions for years, ma'am. But seeing you actually fly, seeing you handle that emergency, that was better than any classroom lesson. You're everything they say you are and more." Around them, a crowd was gathering. Passengers who had been on Flight 847, airport personnel, emergency responders, media with cameras. Someone had clearly spread the word about who the cargo pilot really was, about the legendary fighter ace who had been sitting in seat 12C when catastrophe struck. The businessman who had been sitting beside her pushed through the crowd, his face shocked. "You're not just a cargo pilot," he said, more statement than question. "I am now," Rebecca replied quietly. "But I used to be something else." A reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Captain Chin, is it true you're the fighter pilot they call Falcon? The one with the classified mission record? The ace who flew in 3 combat zones?" Rebecca looked at the reporter, then at the crowd, then up at the sky where the 2 F-22s were still circling overhead like guardian angels. She had spent 3 years trying to escape her past, trying to live a quiet life away from the spotlight and the weight of command. But some things you can't escape. Some things are part of who you are forever. "Yes," she said simply. "That's who I was. And today you saved 300 lives using those combat skills," the reporter continued. "How does it feel to be a hero again?" Rebecca thought about that question. She thought about Captain Morrison fighting for his life in that ambulance. She thought about all the passengers who would go home to their families tonight because she happened to be on that plane. She thought about the young F-22 pilots who had escorted her down, maintaining their professional composure while probably freaking out internally at the idea of flying wing for the legendary Falcon. "I'm not a hero," she said finally. "I'm just a pilot who did her job. That's all I've ever been." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The passengers of Flight 847 knew it wasn't true. The F-22 pilots circling overhead knew it wasn't true. Major Richardson, standing at attention beside her, knew it wasn't true. She was Falcon, one of the most accomplished combat pilots in military history, and today she had proven that those skills never fade, that training and instinct developed over thousands of hours in the most demanding aircraft in the world doesn't disappear just because you change careers. As investigators began asking her questions about the emergency, as airline officials thanked her repeatedly, as the media captured every moment, Rebecca Chin allowed herself one small smile. She had tried to leave her past behind, but her past had found her anyway at 30,000 feet over Tennessee. And when the moment came, when lives hung in the balance, she had done what she was trained to do. She had flown the mission. She had brought everyone home. Just like always. The sun was setting over Nashville International Airport, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The disabled Boeing 777 sat on the runway, surrounded by equipment and personnel. 2 F-22 Raptors finally broke their orbit and headed back to Dobbins Air Reserve Base, their pilots already composing the report that would electrify fighter squadrons across the country. Falcon was back, at least for one incredible day, and she had reminded everyone why legends become legends. Rebecca stood there on the tarmac, exhausted and overwhelmed, her quiet life shattered but 300 lives saved. Tomorrow there would be investigations and interviews and probably job offers from airlines wanting the most skilled pilot in America. Tomorrow her face would be on every news channel, her story told and retold, her military record declassified and analyzed. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight she was just a pilot who had done her job. And that was enough.